Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of our math series that we're running this year. This is a continuation of what we did back in the pandemic when we had lots of nice virtual conferences happening. Hopefully, like nicely, we don't have the pandemic anymore, which is great, but we're still doing webinars and conferences virtually to just help keep the community together and also provide good quality free CPD to all the teachers around the world because we usually have people from outside of the UK joining as well. Okay, so today, before I say much more, I just want to do a quick test and hopefully people can hear me. So if you can hear me, can you just type something uh, on the channel, on the chat, YouTube, and then just to make sure that you can hear me okay. Hi, great. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so people can hear me, and I'm just gonna ask Gemma to say something, and then if you can hear her, just let us know as well, please.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you can hear me.
Okay, can you hear her? Great, brilliant. All right, so my name is Flavia. I am the chief scientist at Seneca. I have been the chief scientist of Seneca for 5 years now, and I usually host these web conferences as well. So I'm going to start with a quick presentation about Seneca, but not the whole thing, just the specific things that we have for maths. So Seneca is a really, really popular online learning platform in the UK. We are used by 96% of secondary schools in the UK. So that's almost everybody. And we're really happy about that. But we didn't used to have a big usage in maths, and that's why we developed a whole new thing for maths exclusively. So we have new modules, new question types, new marking schemes, and everything is so good. And I'm really excited to show you how that works. So I'm gonna do that for 5 minutes or so, and then Gemma will start with her presentation. It's gonna last about 20 minutes. Then we're gonna have a Q&A session, and there will be the end. So this whole thing should take around 45 minutes to complete. Okay. Uh, just a few general information before we get started. We will be using the chat, the YouTube chat, as our way of communicating with each other. So any questions that you have, any comments that you have, just type and we can see it and then we get to answer them. The more questions, the better. So any questions that you have, any comments, anything, things that you want to share about your own experience, things that you relate, that you agree with them or that you don't agree or that you have questions that you want her to elaborate more on, just type that in the chat and we'll get back to you during the Q&A session. So the more interaction we have, the better. And second thing is that we have another 2 episodes of this series happening this week. So we have one today, one tomorrow, and one on Wednesday. And you can see all of those on Eventbrite. So I'm going to post the link here in the channel. And then it would be great if you could as well join those 2 webinars as well. So I just posted here in the channel. And yeah, same thing, free. Just go there and grab your ticket so you can join us tomorrow and Wednesday again. And the last thing is that you can get a certificate for attending this webinar. And I will be sharing Google Forms, just a normal form, at the end of Gemma's presentation that you can just fill out, and then you're gonna get your certificate in a couple of days. All right, good. So let me share my screen and show you a little bit about Seneca and a bit of our new maths modules. Can people just, as I do there, can you just let me know if you are new to Seneca, if you already know Seneca, or something in between? So I can know, maybe if nobody knows Seneca, I can give you a little bit more of an overview about what we do. So let me just share my screen. Wait. Present. Great. So this is our new and upgraded maths content. So Seneca, for those of you who don't know, Seneca is an online learning platform that is entirely based on neuroscience and how the brain works. It has been proven to double students' learning, double students' performance. They learn faster, they learn better, and it saves you a lot of time. It helps you with your lessons as well because it's all auto-marked and it generates a full learning report about each of your students, each of your classes, so you can check the learning gaps, knowledge gaps, any student who is falling behind, any student who's overperforming. So you can have all of that information and really use Seneca as formative assessment as well to really keep track of your students' progress. It's really easy to use, it's free, and we have not only maths, but most of the other subjects as well. So feel free to share with your colleagues in other departments, although they probably already know us anyway. Um, Okay, so usually the normal Seneca would be that we show students some slides with a review of the content, and then they have questions, testing, being challenged about their content, because we use retrieval practice as the main learning path, and that means active retrieval and answering questions and practicing exercises. The problem is there, and I will show you what it used to be like in the background. So the normal Seneca would have the questions hard coded into our platform. So nobody sees this, that's just internal, but I'm just showing you so you know the difference. So for example, this is the old style Seneca. We would start with some explanations, and then in this case, we have 6 questions. But all of those 6 questions are hard coded. So every time that students comes here, they will see that same question with 2, 9, 15, and 4. Okay, so basically they're just solving the same thing over and over again, which is great and it helps and works really well for the other subjects. But for maths, you really need to practice the procedural memory. Uh, so it doesn't work that well for maths and just gets a bit boring after a while. So instead of just having hard coded questions, so in this case, there's 6 questions, that's all they have to do. But what we created, and that was months of work, was this new style of calculations here, which use scripts and coding and LaTeX to, I don't know what the opposite of hard code is, soft code maybe. But basically, instead of saying the numbers directly, we just use the code. And then every time that the student comes here to practice this, they will see different numbers. So it's the same question, it's the same calculation thing that they have to do, but each time is a different number. So there's no risk for the students to just memorize the answer. They actually have to go and complete the calculation, complete that work. And that's how they learn, because they're going to be doing that again and again and again, each time with new numbers. And we also have a marking scheme, which is really well detailed. So students can, maybe not that one. So students can see step by step. So if they're getting confused or they're not sure, they can go and click on get a hint, and then they will be given step by step on how to answer that question all the way to the end. So they're shown line by line of the calculation of the work until they get to the final answer. Okay, and the same thing, once they give the answer, they can check, and then this will be the mark scheme as well explained to them. So they can compare. They can also write line by line. So I can do like, I'm just typing anything, right? But basically, I can do different lines, and then I can compare my response and my work with the actual work. I can use a calculator, so it's like super nice, super well developed. And even better than that, we have 3 levels of questions always. We have level 1, level 2, level 3. And Seneca is adaptive. So students always start with the level 1 question. If they get them correctly, they're going to go to level 2. If they get them correctly, they go to level 3. But if they get them wrong, they go back to level 2. If they get it wrong, they go back to level 1. If they get it wrong, they go back to watching the video or the presentation again. So it's really adaptive, and it really keeps students being challenged. They will never be bored. They will never feel like it's too easy, but they will never feel like it's too hard. It will always be in this desirable difficulties sweet spot of really challenging students, but making sure that they are learning and they are engaged. Okay? And all of that is reported back to you on your teacher platform for free. So I'm just going to show you on the student view. So that was the background that nobody else will see. So they are marked. So if you go to this example here at Excel, you see all the new ones are the new ones. So if I start on this one, you'll see that we'll start with a video that just explains how to solve that particular thing. I'm gonna skip it for now. And then we have what I said, what I showed you before, right? So I can do all my calculations here. Anything. I can add a new line, right? And then I can use a virtual keyboard if I want. And then I can get a hint if I want, like I showed you before, right? So it will tell me step by step how to answer those questions, right? And it will correct me, will mark for me step by step until I get to the end. Okay, I'm just gonna stop sharing. I cannot see you while I'm presenting, and then see if there's any questions or comments here. Okay, so I see some people are new to Seneca. People have been to conferences before. Some people know Seneca. That's great. Does anybody have any question about what I presented now, how this works? Do you want to know more about Seneca? Let me know right now. We still have 3 minutes, and then I'll let Gemma start her presentation. In the meantime, I will share with you this link for this particular section that I was showing you, and then you can try yourself at home as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna share that with you. So it's in the chat, and that would be great if you could check and also set an assignment to your students. So for those of you who do not know how Seneca work, you can create a teacher account that is free, and then you can use Seneca to set assignments to your students. So you just select the ones that you want, they will complete that, and you get a full, complete, insightful report about each of your students' progress. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I really, really hope that you'll try that in your own time and then use with your students. And any questions or any comments that you have, any feedback that they have, do let us know, because we want to keep making Seneca better and better and better for maths and the other subjects as well. Cool, so we can go to the main event now, which is Gemma's talk, and I'll stop talking now. And just to remind you to use the chat to ask questions. Please do ask questions, because it just makes everything better. Wait until the end, where I'm gonna share the link for the certificate. And if you wanna go on Twitter, that would be great. We using hashtag SenecaCPD. And the other thing that I forgot to mention, sorry, Dem, is that this is officially part of the Maths Week England. So this is a really cool organization, really cool initiative that just brings maths teachers together, and they have several events. So this is just one of them, but they have several events. So you can go on their website and check it out. I'll post that on the chat as well. Okay, so we're really happy to be part of this big event. It happens every year, and it's a whole week dedicated to maths. I will have webinars and presentations and teach meets and etc. etc. So it's really nice to be part of that as well. And I'll share their website on the chat. All right, so Gemma, up to you now. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. Gemma has given a talk before, so she was part of the conference, right, during the pandemic. So it's very nice to have her back here today.
Thank you, Flavia. Well, good evening, everybody. You know, it's always such a privilege to talk to maths teachers and teachers in general that are giving up their time, particularly on a Monday evening in November. So thank you for coming along this evening. As Flavia said, I am on Twitter @DirectorMaths. So let's get things going in the chat, but also continuing the conversation over on Twitter as well. So I have the pleasure of being Director of Maths at a secondary school just outside of Hull. And looking back on when I first started teaching, I think I must have been very naive, because looking back now, I can see what I can only kind of describe as career-defining epiphanies. And one of those is the basis of what I'm going to talk about tonight. So over a couple of years, I was sat there at parents' evening and I'd ask the killer question. The phrase we all use that's going to allow me to determine how the next 5 minutes of my life is going to go. So, such and such, how's maths going for you? And year in, year out, I would come across this phrase. I get it when we do it in class, but then I don't know what to do in tests. And I'd sit there and I'd try and offer a little bit of reassurance. Oh, you know, everybody feels like that. Don't worry, it'll all start to fall into place. You just need to do past papers. And I never really gave much thought into why I believed that. I think the only thing I was basing that on was the fact that it had all kind of come good for me. I hadn't thought about why that had happened or the conditions that my teachers had created in order for that to happen. And, you know, I just held this belief that somehow it was all going to be okay. You know, like naturally growing older will solve this problem. But then one day it hit me. And as I say, I must have been naive up until this point. Well, in a maths lesson, we tend to put everything in nice little boxes. Okay, so the students come in, we tell them to write down the title. It's immediate from the start of the lesson, exactly what we're working on. We do some worked examples, we do some practice, and there's so many fantastic resources out there for practice. So it's obvious what the students are working on. And then back in the day, I thought, I know what the problem is. My students can't do problem-solving questions in tests or in exams. So what I'll do is I'll introduce them to them in the lesson. So we'll do our worked examples, we'll do our practice, and then we'll go for some worded problems or some problem-solving questions. Except that didn't really help either. And this is the example I always use with my team. That if I give you a worksheet on adding decimals, and at the end think that somehow adding in a worded problem becomes more challenging, well, actually, I haven't made it more challenging. All I've done is make it mildly more irritating for the students to pick out the numbers and add them together. So as my career developed, and as I started to think about this a little bit more, it seems that we can't solve this issue that the students are reporting in a single lesson. So instead, what we need is to have a curriculum approach. Now, as with defining any curriculum, we need to first of all establish what we want to do with our curriculum. And for me, it makes sense to think about knowledge in maths as 3 different types of knowledge. So, we first of all have our declarative knowledge. So that's the what. You've got your factual recall. Name this 2D shape, for example. You've got your vocabulary. Which part of the fraction is the denominator? And you've got your symbols. And actually, aside from tonight, I think there's a really valuable conversation to be had about declarative knowledge in maths and whether we do assess it and whether we should and how we would go about doing that. As I say, not a conversation for tonight. Then we've got the points where I think a lot of maths teachers feel most comfortable, developing procedural knowledge. So things like worked examples and practice on the procedure of adding fractions, finding the mean, completing the square. But it seems there's something more. And for me, that more comes with conditional knowledge. So what is conditional knowledge? Well, conditional knowledge is an understanding of when and how to use something we already know. For example, using different strategies in different situations. So to me, when the students are coming out with this, that's what they're talking about. They're saying, I understand the declarative knowledge, I understand the procedural knowledge, but it's the conditional knowledge, the knowing when, that we weren't quite developing in the past. So, back in 2021, Ofsted put out a guidance report talking about their experience of declarative, procedural and conditional knowledge. And regardless of what you think about Ofsted, it's undeniable that they have access to a lot of maths lessons, far more than I do, and a lot of students. And they said this: successful problem solving is not just an activity, but an outcome of successful learning of the facts and methods and their useful combination as strategies. So this idea of putting together the declarative and the procedural and knowing when is all linked into problem solving. Okay, that makes sense. So what does research say about problem solving then? What makes a good problem solver? Well, you need to have a big knowledge base to draw from. Okay, that makes sense. You need to have had exposure to similar problems before, and you need to be resilient, amongst other things. Okay, so what is that going to look like for my students? Well, why do we need a big knowledge base to draw from? Well, as humans, we have a finite capacity within our working memory. So the more challenging a problem, the more space I'm going to need within my working memory to work on that. Which means that prior knowledge, the declarative and the procedural, needs to take up as least space as possible. And how do we achieve that? Well, by automating that prior knowledge, making sure that they really understand the procedures that they need to carry out, but also that it's got high retrieval strength. So if I select a problem and my students identify that they need to add some fractions, for example, then I don't want them to be thinking, right, how do I go about adding fractions? Do I add the tops and the bottoms, or do I need to do something else? I need that to be automated because the focus of that particular question is on selecting the right method and carrying it out. And then for me, there's the tricky one. So we often see it quoted, don't we? You know, how do job seekers get experience without having experience? How do I expose my students to similar problems before they go on to solve those problems? Well, it's impossible for us to predict every single problem that they might be expected to solve. So let's go back and see what Ofsted said about this. Well, expertise is largely domain specific. Okay, so mastering adding fractions, for example, isn't necessarily going to help me with standard form. That makes sense. Strategies for solving problems are topic specific. Okay, so the process that I might go through for a compound area question is different to the process I might go through for angles in parallel lines, for example. And therefore, they should be planned into the content sequence for that topic. Okay, well, then we can start to see how we're going to structure this problem-solving curriculum, building in opportunities, first of all, to make sure the declarative and the procedural knowledge are covered, but also opportunities for conditional knowledge. But then they also talked about how problem-solving has certain generic skills that pupils can transfer to multiple topics and subdomains. Okay, so we've got our topic-specific skills, but we've also got our generic skills that we can start to work through with our students. And then as well, they need to be resilient. Well, goodness me, what on earth does resilient mean? Well, according to the dictionary, they are then able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. Excellent. So we're working with teenagers. That sounds good. Right. So I then need to make sure that I can foster the right conditions so that students feel that the atmosphere and the resources that I'm giving them are suitable for solving problems. I need to find a way to help them create success so they, don't see this as a mountain that's too high to climb. And somehow I need to help them recover from these knocks. Okay, so that doesn't even scratch the surface on the research around problem solving in maths and conditional knowledge. But what on earth does that mean for the students that are seeing this come parents' evening? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit then about the journey that we've been on in terms of our curriculum. So, first of all, we can't get away from the fact that we need to define the declarative and the procedural knowledge. Without that, there is no conditional knowledge. We need to secure high quality teaching and learning. They need to make sure that the procedures they learn are correct and they understand them. We need to maintain retrieval strength. Remember, we need that broad knowledge base, but for it to be automated as well. And then it comes down to equipping students with the generic skills, whatever we decide they might be, and providing them with time to practice, but also having in mind that this is a journey for the students. They're developing this skill of problem solving through our curriculum. So what did we do? Well, first of all, we looked at the sequencing of our curriculum. So here is an extract from our Year 9 higher scheme of learning. So this is the first term or so. So we allow time for retrieval and consolidation in between similar topics so that there is time to consolidate and extend topics before they're being built on. So, for example, we start off with accuracy, and a couple of topics later, then we start to do calculations with bounds. And then we looked at our problem-solving curriculum, and they're the dark green ones. Okay, so tonight I'm going to focus on this first one, problem-solving with angles. Now, bearing in mind, this is Year 9 higher. They've done the topics up until that point. Okay, so they've done angles in 2D shapes, and they've done angles in polygons. And they've also done some number work and a little bit of algebraic manipulation. So what did we do? Well, we sat down as a team and we said, okay, each of these problem-solving topics, we looked over the research, is going to be 3 hours. And all of them, regardless of the topic, have the same structure. The first lesson is all about activating that prior knowledge, but doing so in such a way that we can assess the depth of that understanding. So we ask a lot of diagnostic questions, minimally different questions, and the focus is making sure that the students are not just on autopilot. I'm not just concerned with can you add fractions, but I'm interested in, do you understand how you are making a common denominator, for example? So these aren't our questions, but thank you to those people who do share them online. So lots of mini whiteboard work, assessing, do students have that prior knowledge? And if they don't, then we're going to recover it. And this for me then is key, explaining to the students why you are doing what you're doing. We're about to work on some minimally different questions. What are they? What do I want you to be doing? And I don't know if you've seen the work that Mr. Barton's done on in his Reflect, Expect, Check, Explain book, but explain to the students that this is the process that I want you to be going through. I'm not just interested in you getting the correct answer. I'm not just interested in you showing you're working out. What I want you to do is see the connections between each question. Okay. And then we move into lesson 2. So lesson 2 starts to look at developing some of these generic skills. So we'll look at some goal-free problems. We'll start to talk about chains of reasoning. We'll start to look at some same surface, different deep, because the idea of this conditional knowledge is knowing when to apply something and crucially when not to apply something. Again, we're explaining to the students each step. Okay, so thinking about a goal-free problem, what can you start to write down? We're giving people a way in and lots of different possible starting points. Okay, lots of different goal-free problems lend themselves well to shape topics. Let's just take out the question part. And same surface, different deep, creating small ways to start developing that idea of method selection. And then we go into lesson 3. And I don't know, maybe I'm a bit strange in the sense of I always like to see just how far I can take things. So I'm going to show you the types of questions that our Year 9 higher, as part of this problem solving with angles topic, would start to look at. But remember, this isn't just about one standalone topic. This is about a problem solving curriculum that's going to take our students through 3 or even 5 years. So what are the kinds of things that you as a classroom teacher might be wanting to think about when you first start introducing these problems? Well, you might want to increase the number of steps. So when I show you the questions, think about how the number of steps that the students are expected to do builds up or potentially doesn't build up. You might want to think about decreasing or increasing the amount of scaffolding that you're giving to students, because they're not born with these innate problem-solving skills. We have to start to put in scaffolding to help them get there in the long term. And changing the amount of autonomy. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So here are some questions. I can see somebody in the chat asked about getting hold of the slides. So yeah, that's not a problem. So we're really trying to weave in everything that our students have done up until this point. So work, for example, in accuracy on error intervals, coming into an angles topic. Should make it a little bit more interesting. And then pushing them a step further. I think potentially with that number 10, some of the typesetting's not quite carried forward. And building up to this, now, Year 9 higher, are all students going to be able to access that? Well, potentially not. But what are we trying to do? Can we put some scaffolding in? Can I decrease the amount of autonomy I expect students to have? How am I equipping them with domain-specific problem-solving skills and also with generic problem solving skills as well. So things to keep in mind. Remember, this isn't just a standalone topic. Skills will develop over time, but they'll develop over time if we have a purposeful plan of how we're going to do that. Don't be afraid to provide scaffolding. The first time students see these kinds of questions, they're going to need a little bit of help. Okay, putting that scaffolding in and removing it as appropriate is definitely something that we should be doing. But also, you're the expert in the room. Don't be afraid to pull the class back together after they've had a chance to think about it, to discuss it, and model these answers using metacognitive processes. Because these aren't just, as I keep saying, standalone topics. You're developing a problem-solving curriculum in order to support the development of conditional knowledge. So yeah, we have to do these things in a maths lesson. We have to put things in boxes from time to time with the title, with the worked examples, with the practice. That's what good practice in maths might look like. But actually, through a curriculum approach, we can start to support students in developing their conditional knowledge. So tonight I've talked about one way in which we've gone about developing conditional knowledge with our students, but each and every one of you will have a slightly different situation, different students, different staff. So if I could encourage you to do one thing, have a think about some of these reflection questions. Please do feel free to ask some more questions in the chat, but go away, talk to colleagues. How are you developing conditional knowledge with your student? Is it being effective? How do you know? And what would your students say? Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Gemma. That was really good. That was so well explained. That was really excellent. So thank you for that. Thanks for joining us again. And we have questions in the chat, so I'm going to start reading them. But if somebody thinks of a new question, just go ahead, like Angel just did. So go ahead and keep adding them to the chat because we have now 10 minutes or so to answer the questions. So I'm gonna try to start kind of chronological, from the oldest one to the new one, and now post them in the chat again, and then highlight them so that everybody can see. So that was one of the first ones that came. So should building resilience be a school-wide initiative?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it's something that we were talking about on a recent cross-trust training day, actually. When you look at school values, I would imagine that, a large percentage of schools in the United Kingdom do have resilience as part of their school values. And it's how do you develop that? Because you're right, as a standalone subject, you can go so far, but that doesn't account for the rest of the time. So definitely, I think building resilience should be a school-wide initiative. And, some of the things that we've talked about tonight in terms of creating those conditions in order to allow students to flourish, to try problem solving, and ultimately to be supported to get it right or wrong are just some of the ways in which maths can contribute to that.
Nice. And when you prepare, that's just my follow-up question. When you are preparing your lessons, do you discuss with your heads of the other subjects as well, how they are building resilience in their lessons?
It's not something that I have done yet, but yeah, you make a really good point, Flavia. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just because there are probably other heads here or even teachers, and they all this kind of talking to other departments is always maybe an interesting idea.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So the next question that we have is very maths specific. I did Google the term, but I'm sure you're gonna know it already. I had to Google it because I didn't know. It was when you were talking about the triangles, I think.
Okay, so minimally different questions are designed for students to see the subtleties between each one. So, for example, if you were solving the equation 2x plus 2 equals 12, then the next question might be 2x add 4 equals 12, so that they can see the bits that are changing and the bits that are staying the same, and the impact that that's having on the answer. Same surface, different deep questions are designed to help students see the subtleties between each one where it's applied in the same kind of context. So the ones that I had on the slide, they all related to the same triangle, and what students had to do was kind of see past that surface problem of the triangle and actually look at the deep structure behind it.
Okay, so that would work with other parts of maths as well. It's not just geometry, the minimally different questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are thousands of questions out there. I'd really encourage you to look at different ones because, yeah, we found them to be really useful.
Yeah, okay. And I'm just going to mention that again with the new maths modules on Seneca. That is exactly what happens. So we have level 1, level 2, level 3. So you get the same question with an extra level of difficulty where you change one thing and then you can keep practicing that by changing one thing at a time, just like Gemma explained.
And I think as well, when it comes to developing conditional knowledge, knowing when to use something is as important as knowing when not to use that thing. And in order to be able to use method selection effectively, it's knowing when to use it and when not to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's also a very good point. Okay, so we have a question here from Miss Hudson's, and I'm sharing now.
Okay, really good question. It depends. Now, the one that we looked at this evening in terms of problem solving with angles will come up between 4 to 6 weeks after that second angle topic has been taught. Each lesson in between then, we're using our retrieval practice starters to make sure that students have got that prior knowledge and to start to automate it. Some of the others come a little bit later. And the reason for that is because we can start to interweave different topics. So we're making sure that we've covered enough so that then we can start to bring more things into the problem-solving topics.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense as well. So there was it's not a question, but there was a request from Miss Wilkinson asking you to talk a little bit about how you do that with the higher class or foundation class.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the problems that we would use with a foundation group might be at a lower level, but it would be going through the same kinds of process. So the first lesson would still be about activating the prior knowledge. The second lesson would still be about the generic skills. The problems themselves in the third lesson would be more appropriate to the prior attainment status of the students. But I think as well, the kind of differentiation by time and thinking, right, okay, well, I want to develop this skill with my students and I've got 3 years or 5 years to do it, however you define it. And it might be that we would remove the scaffolding slower for the foundation students, or, you know, we'd focus maybe on 4 problems rather than 10 and just working through those as more of a class at first, with the ultimate goal of, you know, as we work through these problem-solving topics, I'm also developing those generic skills and removing that scaffolding as appropriate. But I can provide some more examples of that on Twitter if people would like me to.
Yeah, that would be great. So yeah, if you're on Twitter, just go ahead and follow her. It's you can see on her name there, the handle. Okay, so just following up from that, there was a question about scaffolding. So how do you actually know when it's time to start removing scaffolding for a particular student?
Yeah, this is a really good question because the part that I haven't really talked about tonight is where does assessment for learning fit in with this and responsive teaching? Well, you know, throughout that first lesson, with the diagnostic questions, with the minimally different questions, we're assessing the students. Throughout the second lesson, when students are coming up with their own questions for the goal-free problems, we're getting that feedback, we're having that discussion. And then in terms of removing the scaffolding, I would say when you're first starting to implement these lessons, don't be afraid to put scaffolding in because you'll get a feel for whether the students need it or not. And some students will need it in the same room as those that don't. And it's about knowing your students, get a feel for when is appropriate to remove them. But I would say give them some time to think. It might be that you have two similar resources, one with the scaffolding in and one without. Give them some time to think and watch and see what happens. Allow them to discuss, and you'll soon start to see whether they need that scaffolding or not.
Okay. Yeah, that works. Thank you. That's really good advice. And we have two more questions here, so we still have a little bit of time, so we can go through them. So the first one is if you realize that they haven't learned actually something that they should, as was a prerequisite for that topic.
Yeah, and that for us again has been a benefit of having these planned into the curriculum. So we had obviously our post-pandemic recovery, and we had some staffing issues in the following year from general illness. And what we found is that sometimes you'll start on these problem-solving topics, and you know the plan. You've got your 3 hours there. You know what you're going to do with them. But actually, with the best will in the world, that prerequisite knowledge isn't at the right level that you need it to be, and therefore by keeping it responsive in terms of using your mini whiteboards and things, you've got that, you can see how the students are doing. And yeah, it'll be a case of going back, consolidating that prerequisite knowledge. And it might be that, you know, you don't get as much time to work on the problems at the end, but ultimately there's no point persevering with it if the students don't have that prerequisite knowledge. The research is really, really clear about that. You can only develop conditional knowledge when your declarative and procedural knowledge is at the right level. So yeah, absolutely, we would go back, we would reteach as appropriate and just bump everything back slightly.
That's one advantage of using formative assessments very often, right? So you can catch those gaps in knowledge, I suppose. Yeah. Cool. And then the last question that we have is from Laura. So do you make the problem-solving questions up yourself?
Oh, the reason why I'm laughing is because we do it as a team. So we spent quite a fair bit of time in faculty meetings coming up with these questions, and staff got really, really competitive. And you'd find that, you know, we resourced the first couple of topics together in faculty meetings, and then people were responsible for resourcing some of their own. And you'd hear them going, come on, look at this problem that I've come up with. And you'd see them kind of working through in the maths office on the whiteboard and things like that. And it was fantastic CPD for the staff as well, thinking about, right, okay, well, how far can I take this? What can I do? What kind of steps might I want to put in? How might I change the autonomy? How might I remove the scaffolding? So yeah, in a lot of cases, we have come up with the problems ourselves, adapted from problems that exist. And yeah, I think it's a really good way of generating that discussion as a maths team in terms of, you know, what problems can we come up with, but ultimately, how are we going to guide our students in being able to solve it?
And you do that every year, I guess.
Yeah, so now that our units are largely resourced, some of them have been changed and updated because we've updated some of our curriculum. But yeah, it's good CPD just to go back and, you know, look at how they went and can we think of any more problems, and thinking about, you know, kind of the exams and things that have happened that summer. Do we need to update any? Was there any that our students didn't perform particularly well on? Where do we need to build those in, etc.?
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. We already done more than 45 minutes. So that was great because there were lots of questions coming. And I think we actually did more time on questions than on the actual presentation, which is the best sign that we can get from how interested people were on the presentation. So thanks so much. Gemma, is there anything that you still want to share or say? Or
Nope. If there is anything that comes up, either from the people that are watching live or the people following on later, please do just drop me a tweet and I'll get back to you with what I
yeah,
can.
perfect. Thank you so much. And I have just shared here in the chat the link for the certificates. So just a normal Google form. Just let me know your name and email, etc., and then we'll prepare your certificates. Don't forget to check out Seneca's new math modules. Don't forget to check out the Maths Week England schedule because they have lots of cool events. And do get your tickets for tomorrow and Wednesday's webinars as well because we have another excellent talk happening each day this week. So thank you everybody for joining, and I hope you have a nice evening, and I hope I'll see you all again tomorrow. Yes, you will get the slides. We will send an email to everybody with the slides and the recording as well. So for those of you who are a bit late, you can watch from the beginning. Okay, so thank you so much. Have a good evening, and I'll see you all tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.